My name is Margaret Whitfield and I am 66 years old. Until recently, I believed my life would end quietly in Owensboro, Kentucky, the little town where I was born, taught for 40 years as a librarian, and buried my husband. After my retirement last spring, I imagined I would spend my days tending my rose bushes, drinking tea on the porch, Andre reading my favorite books until the end of my time. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It started with a phone call from my son, Daniel. His voice through the line was firm, practiced, the same voice that once recited bedtime stories, but now carried the sharp cadence of command. "Mom, it's not safe for you to stay there alone. I've already talked to Rebecca. We've set up a room for you here in Louisville. I'll come pick you up this weekend." I tried to laugh it off, saying I liked my quiet town and didn't need to bother them. But Daniel's tone left no room for discussion. "I've already made the decision," he said. That phrase, it was exactly what my late husband used to say when I tried to disagree with him. Daniel was everything a mother should be proud of. Well-dressed, confident, successful. He managed projects for a large construction firm, earning a salary that once sounded like fantasy tome. But behind his success, there was Ackle, a perfection that reminded me too much of his father's need for control. When he arrived that Saturday, the November air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and wet leaves. Daniel stepped out of a black SUV, wearing a tailored coat and an impatient smile. "Come on, Mom, let's get you packed." I wanted to protest, but his efficiency swept through the house like a cold wind. In less than an hour, the boxes that held my lifetime of books, photographs, and keepsakes were loaded into the car. The drive to Louisville felt endless. The rolling hills and barns of western Kentucky faded into the glitter of city lights. Daniel talked about his job, his upcoming promotion, his new condo on the river. I nodded and smiled, though my heart sank with every mile. I could already feel my freedom shrinking. When we finally reached the high-rise building, my breath caught. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and glass walls that reflected the night skyline. Daniel carried my suitcase inside as his wife Rebecca appeared at the door. She was petite with soft auburn hair and eyes that smiled even when her lips didn't. "Welcome, Mom," she said warmly, hugging me. Yet something in her arms felt stiff, rehearsed, like someone who had learned to make kindness a shield. Daniel showed me the guest room, furnished neatly with a view of the Ohio River. "Everything you need is here," he said. "Now you can finally relax." I smiled, thanking him. But as I sat on the edge of the immaculate bed, listening to the hum of the city outside, an uneasy thought crept into my mind. For the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was moving closer to my family or into another cage that simply had prettier walls. The first few days in Louisville passed in a blur of polite adjustments. Daniel left early for work every morning, his briefcase in one hand and his phone in the other, already talking to someone before the door closed. Rebecca busied herself in the kitchen, always gentle, always smiling, though her eyes seemed to flinch whenever she heard Daniel's footsteps echo down the hallway. At first I tried to see only the good. The apartment was beautiful, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river, polished floors, the faint scent of coffee in the mornings. Rebecca cooked elaborate meals, and Daniel always insisted we eat together. "Family dinners are important," he would say, his fork tapping lightly on his plate, his voice calm, but heavy with expectation. But as days turned into weeks, I began noticing small cracks beneath the polished surface. Rebecca apologized too much when she spilled a few drops of water when the food wasn't seasoned perfectly. Even when Daniel misplaced his keys, and Daniel, though polite tone, spoke to her with a tone that carried a quiet threat. His voice was never raised, but each word landed like a warning. "You should pay attention next time." "Do I have to remind you again?" I pretended not to notice, but the silence that followed his sentences felt suffocating. One evening, while we were clearing the dishes, Rebecca rolled up her sleeves, and I caught sight of a faint yellow bruise on her forearm. She quickly pulled the sleeve back down and smiled too fast, too wide. "Oh, this? I hit the cupboard yesterday? I'm so clumsy." I nodded and said nothing, though my stomach tightened. Daniel's control extended to everything. What groceries were bought, which TV shows were allowed, even how the furniture was arranged. "It's about order," he said one afternoon when Rebecca tried to move a chair. "A house should run smoothly. Everyone should know their place." It wasn't just her he managed. He began managing me too. He reminded me to take my vitamins, to check my blood pressure, to rest at specific hours, as if I were a child under his supervision. At first, I thought he was being a caring son. But soon I realized every act of care came with a subtle command. Don't go out alone. Don't open the balcony door. Don't waste electricity by keeping the lights on. Still, I told myself it was just his way of showing love. Until one night. It was close to 3 a.m. when I woke to a sound that didn't belong. The condo was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Then came the steady rush of water, the sound of the shower running. I checked the clock. 2 a.m. At first I thought Rebecca might have trouble sleeping, but when the sound continued night after night, always at the same time, I began to wonder. Every morning Rebecca appeared, at breakfast pale and distant, her eyes red-rimmed from sleeplessness. Daniel, fresh and composed, read the newspaper as if nothing was wrong. On the fourth night, I lay in bed listening again. The water ran for 15 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound itself. I stared at the ceiling, my heart beating faster. Something inside this perfect home was terribly, dangerously wrong, and I had no idea how deep it went. That night, the sound of running water began again, soft at first, then growing louder, steady, relentless. I sat up in bed and glanced at the clock, 3 sharp. The city lights outside painted faint silver lines across the carpet. For a few moments, I tried to convince myself it was just plumbing or an overactive imagination. But something deep inside me whispered otherwise. I slipped out of bed, careful not to make a sound. The floorboards were cool beneath my bare feet as I made me way down the hall. The bathroom door was slightly ajar, a thin beam of light cutting across the dark corridor. I heard more than just water now. Low murmuring, a sharp gasp, then a muffled cry. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. Step by step, I approached the door. Through the small opening, the scene inside snapped into focus. Rebecca stood under the shower, still fully dressed in her pajamas. The water poured over her hair and down her face, soaking the fabric until it clung to her skin. Daniel was behind her, one hand gripping her hair, forcing her head under the stream. His other hand pressed against her shoulder, keeping her in place. "Maybe this will teach you to keep quiet," he hissed through clenched teeth. Rebecca's body shook violently under the icy spray, but she made no sound beyond a strangled whimper. Myson's face, my sweet boy who once cried when his dog died, was now twisted with the same cold fury I had seen in his father's eyes so many years ago. My throat tightened. Every nerve screamed for me to burst in to pull him away, to save her. But my body froze. The sight blurred as old memories came rushing back. My husband's drunken rage, thesting of his hand across my cheek, the sound of my own voice begging him to stop. The air thickened. The walls seemed to close in. I clutched the doorframe, trembling, unable to breathe. The past and the present fused into one unbearable nightmare. Daniel's shadow against the tiles looked just like his father's that night long ago when I had hidden behind the bedroom door, praying for it to end. A sharp slap echoed through the bathroom, pulling me back. Rebecca sagged against the wall, too weak to resist. Daniel turned off the water with a flick of his wrist, breathing heavily. He didn't speak another word. He just stared at her for a long, chilling moment before walking out, his wet sleeves sticking to his arms. I ducked back into the hallway before he saw me, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. When I finally returned to my room, I collapsed onto the bed, shaking uncontrollably. I could still hear the water dripping from the shower head, a steady rhythm of guilt, shame, and terror. I pulled the blanket over my head like a frightened child and lay there until dawn, my tears soaking the pillow. I had always believed monsters died with my husband, but that night I learned a cruel truth. Sometimes the darkness doesn't die. It learns to walk again in the face of your own sun. The next morning, sunlight flooded through the kitchen window, but it felt cold and foreign. I sat at the breakfast table, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone lukewarm. Daniel flipped through his newspaper, calm as ever, while Rebecca quietly set the table, her movements careful and precise, as though one wrong motion could shatter the peace. Every time Daniel's hand moved, she flinched, and I realized I was doing the same. I wanted to speak. I wanted to shout the truth, to call him the monster he had become. But when his eyes met mine, calm, composed, and unreadable, I felt that old familiar fear seize my chest, the same fear that had ruled my marriage, that had kept me silent for years. So Ismailed instead. "Daniel," I said softly, forcing my voice steady, "I've been thinking, maybe I should move into a retirement residence. There's one near the river, Blue Ridge Community. It would give you 2 more space. And well, I think it's time I learned to live quietly." The newspaper crinkled in his hands. "You what?" His voice was sharp, incredulous. "I've looked into it. They have a library, a garden, friends my age. It seems nice." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not going anywhere. What will people think if my own mother moves out? They'll say I don't take care of you." Rebecca froze, holding a teapot midair. I could feel her pleading eyes on me, begging silently not to make him angry. "I'm not doing this to upset you, son," I said gently. "It's just I want my independence. You have your life. I need mine." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, with a dismissive laugh that didn't reach his eyes, he said, "Fine, do whatever makes you happy, Mom." But the way his fingers tightened around the cup told me he was anything but fine. That afternoon, I packed my few belongings. Rebecca helped me fold my clothes, her hands trembling. When we were alone, she whispered, "Please don't go. He's worse when you're not here." I took her cold hands in mine. "You are stronger than you think," I said, though the words nearly choked me. "When the time comes, you'll know what to do." Her lips trembled as she tried to smile. Daniel drove me to the retirement residence in silence. When he dropped me off, he didn't hug me goodbye. He just said, "Call if you need anything," and drove away, leaving a faint cloud of exhaust in the crisp November air. Blue Ridge was peaceful, too peaceful. There were no shouts, no slammed doors, no midnight showers. The staff were kind, the food was good, the bed soft. But every night I woke up at 3 a.m. hearing phantom water running in my head. Peace without conscience is only another kind of prison. I had escaped the house, but I hadn't escaped the truth. Rebecca was still trapped inside, that silence I knew too well, and I had walked away from her just as others once walked away from me. The days at Blue Ridge passed quietly, almost too quietly. Every morning I joined the other residents for coffee and crossword puzzles, pretending to laugh at their stories. But my thoughts always drifted back to that bathroom, to Rebecca's soaked hair clinging to her pale face, to the hollow echo of the water that still haunted my nights. Guilt sat heavy in my chest. I had run from one kind of prison into another, the prison of cowardice. One afternoon, while sitting on a bench beneath the maple trees that flamed red against the autumn sky, I met Helen Brooks. She was a retired nurse, sharp-witted despite her 70 years, with a kindness that could see through any pretense. She noticed the way I stared into the distance more than I listened. "You're not here to rest," she said one day, setting down her cup of tea. "You're here to hide?" Her words startled me. "Hide from what?" She smiled sadly. "I've seen that look before. My daughter had it once before. She found the courage to leave her husband." "You've seen something terrible, haven't you?" The air caught in my throat. For the first time I couldn't lie. So I told her everything. The bathroom, the bruises, the fear, the way I froze instead of acting. Helen listened without interrupting, only nodding slowly. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice firm. You survived abuse once? That was your test, but this time, it's your chance to stop the same story from repeating. Her words struck deep. I sat there trembling, unable to answer. Do you know what real peace is, Margaret? She continued. It's not sitting in a safe place pretending the world outside doesn't hurt. It's knowing you stood up when it mattered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words circled my thoughts like restless ghosts. Around midnight, I got up, turned on the lamp, and opened my old address book. Near the back was a number I hadn't dialed in years. Miles Carter, an old friend from church who had gone on to become a respected legal aid attorney in Louisville. When I called, his voice was older, slower, but still warm. Margaret Whitfield, after all this time. Miles, I said quietly. I need help. I think my daughter-in-law is in danger from my son. He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Come see me tomorrow morning and bring everything you remember. The next day we met in Asmal Cafe downtown. He listened carefully as I told him everything again, his expression darkening with each detail. If what you're saying is true, she needs protection, he said, but we'll need proof. Something that can't be denied. Photos, recordings, medical reports. Can she get those? I hesitated, then nodded. I think she can if she's still strong enough. As I left the cafe, the winter wind bit at my face, but it couldn't reach the fire building inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't running anymore. I was planning. I met Rebecca 2 days later at a small cafe near the city hospital, pretending it was a casual visit. She looked thinner than I remembered, her skin pale, her voice fragile as porcelain. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide behind a tired smile. Mom, she said softly, I've missed you. I reached across the table and took her trembling hands. I've missed you too, sweetheart. Listen, there's something we need to talk about, but quietly. She looked up, fear flickering in her eyes. He'll be angry if he knows I'm here. I know, I said gently. But this can't wait. I told her about my meeting with Miles Carter, the lawyer, and how we could help her get free if we had proof. Rebecca's lips parted in shock. Proof? He doesn't let me touch my phone when he's home. He checks everything, my messages, my photos, even my call logs. Then we'll be smarter, I said, lowering my voice. I'll get you a small phone, prepaid, hidden. You'll keep it somewhere he'd never look. Inside the lining of your handbag, maybe. From now on, every time he shouts, threatens, or hurts you, turn it on. Record him. If Hal leaves a mark, take a photo and send everything to this email. I slid a folded note across the table with a private address I'd created the night before. Only you and I will have it, not even Miles. She looked terrified. What if he finds out? What if? I squeezed her hand. If he finds out, you call me and I'll call the police. You're not alone anymore, Rebecca. Note of her again. For a moment she said nothing, then nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Over the next 2 weeks, the secret mission began. Late at night, my phone would buzz with new messages from the hidden account. Blurred pictures of bruises, short recordings of Daniel's rage echoing through the condo. Sometimes the audio was faint, but his voice was unmistakable, harsh, cold, inhuman. Every file was a knife to my heart, but I forwarded each one to Miles. He said, we were building a solid case piece by piece. Another week, Margaret, he told me. Then she can get a protection order, but then suddenly the email stopped. 1 day passed, then 2, then 5. Silence. I called her hidden number again and again. No answer. Panic clawed at me until one night. My phone rang and my heart dropped when I saw the caller ID. Daniel? Mom? His voice was calm, almost mocking. I know what you've been doing. I know about the phone, the lawyer, the little secret meetings. I won't forget this. Before I could speak, he hung up. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped the phone. I called Miles immediately, my voice breaking. He knows she's found out. She's in danger. Within the hour, Miles alerted the police. They went to the condo that night. Daniel opened the door, his face composed, his shirt perfectly ironed. "My wife," he said coolly. She fell in the shower, but behind him they saw her, Rebecca, bruised, trembling, barely able to stand. The secret was no longer secret. The war had just begun. The days that followed blurred into a nightmare of hospital visits, police statements, and paperwork. Rebecca stayed in a safe shelter arranged by Miles, too terrified to return home. Daniel was arrested for domestic assault, but released on bail within 48 hours. When I saw his face on the local news, walking out of the courthouse with his lawyer, his expression was calm, almost smug. He thought he could buy his way out, and for a while it seemed he might. Daniel hired one of the most expensive law firms in Kentucky. Their team of attorneys tore through every detail of the case, twisting facts into lies. They claimed the photos were staged, their recordings edited, the bruises self-inflicted. They even brought in a paid psychologist who testified that Rebecca had emotional instability and vivid delusions, implying that she had imagined the abuse. In the courtroom, Daniel sat in his suit, shoulders straight, face composed, the picture of a successful, misunderstood husband. Rebecca sat beside Miles, pale but steady, clutching a handkerchief. I sat behind her, every muscle tense, praying silently that the truth would survive their lies. When it was Daniel's turn to testify, he looked directly at the judge, his tone respectful and measured. "Your Honor, I've always loved my wife. I admit I've raised my voice during arguments, but I've never laid a hand on her. This whole thing, it's been exaggerated. She's been under stress and influenced by outsiders." His eyes flicked toward me, and a faint smile crossed his lips. Outsiders. That's what I was now. The mother who had raised him, now the enemy of his pride. Miles stood to cross-examine. "Mr. Whitfield," he said calmly, "can you explain why your wife was treated for fractured ribs on March 8th? Daniel didn't flinch. She tripped. The kitchen floor was wet. "Can you also explain," Miles continued, "why your neighbor reported hearing shouting at 3:00 in the morning on multiple occasions?" He smiled slightly. "I work late hours. I talk on calls. Maybe they heard that." It was infuriating how easily he bent lies into shape. I could see the uncertainty creeping into the judge's eyes. Without undeniable evidence, Daniel might actually walk free. Then, just as despair began to settle in, Miles's assistant rushed into the courtroom carrying a USB drive. He whispered something to Miles, who turned pale, then stood. "Your Honor," he said, his voice trembling with controlled urgency, "we have new evidence." The judge allowed a short recess while the video was prepared. When the screen flickered to life, the courtroom fell silent. The footage came from a baby monitor camera, the apartment across the street. A reflection caught in the nursery window that faced the Whitfields' hallway. The image was grainy but clear enough. It showed Daniel dragging Rebecca by the arm down the corridor, shouting. Hess slapped her. She fell to her knees. His voice thundered through the hallway. "You belong to me. Do you understand?" Gasps filled the room. Rebecca covered her face. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp and final. Within days, Daniel's case collapsed. He was charged with felony assault and unlawful imprisonment. Rebecca was granted a full divorce, half the assets, and a generous compensation for damages. As he was led from the courtroom, Daniel turned toward me, eyes burning with disbelief. "You destroyed me," he hissed. "No," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." Winter melted slowly into spring, and for the first time in many months, I could breathe again. Rebecca moved into Asmall Brick House in Beestown, a quiet neighborhood lined with oak trees and white fences. The house wasn't large or expensive, but it felt alive. Sunlight poured through the windows. The scent of fresh paint and new beginnings hung in the air. When she invited me over, I was startled by how different she looked. Her hair, once dull and lifeless, shimmered under the afternoon light. There was color in her cheeks again, and when she smiled, it reached her eyes. "It's not much yet," she said, looking around proudly, "but it's mine." Woon packed dishes together, laughing when we broke a plate, something that would have once made her flinch. Later, we sat in the porch with cups of tea, watching the sun sink low over the Kentucky hills. "How does it feel?" I asked softly. She smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "Free," she whispered, "and terrifying, but mostly free." Her courage humbled me. For so long, I'd believed peace came from avoiding pain, from hiding in quiet corners where nothing could touch me. But watching Hera build her life brick by brick, I realized peace was never born from silence. It was carved from struggle. Over the following months, Rebecca began volunteering at a local women's center. She helped survivors find legal resources, comforted frightened mothers, and guided them through paperwork and court hearings. Every time she spoke to another woman trapped in the same darkness she had escaped, her voice grew stronger. One afternoon, while we were rearranging her garden, she paused, glancing at me shilly. "Mom," she said, the first time she had ever called me that without hesitation. "There's something I need to tell you." I turned to her, smiling. "What is it, sweetheart?" She took a deep breath, her hand resting on her stomach. "I went to the doctor last week. I'm pregnant." For a moment I couldn't speak. Then tears blurred my vision. I took her hands, trembling with joy and disbelief. "A baby." She nodded, crying and laughing all at once. After everything that happened, I thought I'd never get tossed over. But life, it has a strange way of giving you back what you thought you'd lost. I pulled her into my arms, holding her close. "This child will never know fear," I whispered. "You've already broken the chain." Months later, when I first held the baby, boy in my arms, I thought of Daniel, my son by blood, now a stranger. And then I looked down at this new life, Rebecca's child, my grandson. And I understood something profound. Family isn't defined by blood. It's built by love, by courage, by the choice to protect rather than control. I stayed in Blue Ridge, visiting them every weekend. Their home became my sanctuary too, a place filled with laughter, warmth, and the faint sound of wind chimes dancing in the Kentucky breeze. Sometimes I still wake at 3:00 a.m., half expecting to hear the rush of running water. But now, when I open my eyes, I see peace instead of fear. Because peace, I've learned, isn't found by escaping the storm. It's found by walking through it and helping someone else out of the rain.